everything in moderation, including moderation. Who said that first? This is Rabbi Yossi Madvig, and you're listening to Jews Did It First. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please subscribe, leave a review, and if you'd like to donate to help contribute to the podcast, please go to jewisoswego.org/Jews Did It First. Just click the Make a Donation button in the upper right-hand corner. Sorry for a late episode this week. It's just that I was sick earlier in the week, and I was going to do it right after Rosh Hashanah, but I became ill. Thank you to one of our students who probably got me ill. Could have been a few of them. Who knows who it was. The weather turns and all of a sudden people's immune systems go crazy. But anyway, I'm glad that I'm feeling a little bit better. And I'm sure you've heard some version of the expression, everything in moderation, or moderation in all things, or something like that. And Ben Franklin is said to have quipped, everything in moderation, including moderation. Well, that's actually a pretty profound statement, whether he knew it or not. We'll get to that. You see, Jews weren't not necessarily the first to coin this phrase, as far as I can tell anyway. It has versions dating back to the 8th century BCE, which is a little bit after the time of King David. Now, perhaps you could make a case that since there's a mitzvah for a king, a Jewish king, not to have too much money or too many horses or too many wives, that maybe that's an example of this concept. And if that were the case, then maybe Jews did it first by about 300 or 400 years. But I think that might be a little bit of a stretch. Examples of this phrase, or some version throughout history, go back, like I said, as early as the 8th century BCE. The historian Hesiod wrote it in Works and Days. He said, observe due measure, moderation is best in all things. The Greek playwright Euripides, I think, echoed that statement in his Medea, I think it's Medea. That was around 431 BCE. He said something like, moderation, the noblest gift of heaven. After him, you have the philosopher Plato, who advised in Gorgias, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce some of these. I guess Gorgias. And that was around 380 or 375 BCE. He says over there we should pursue and practice moderation. Now, centuries later, you get Chaucer putting this in some kind of English, we might call it in Troilus and Crusade, I guess you pronounce it. I'm not sure. I'm not a big Chaucer reader. Sorry. And that was around 1385. And also, like I mentioned, you have Benjamin Franklin saying this, and it crops up, as you get into modernity, it crops up all the time in various publications. Now, that's with regards to a historical background. Now, for everyone's favorite part, Jews did it first. Kind of. So this, too, is in moderation. Like I mentioned, we didn't exactly do it first, but a couple of issues. One is, and I've mentioned this in the past, that the main point of the podcast isn't necessarily that Jews were the first ever to do something, although that does tend to happen, at least in a majority of the episodes. But more so, Jews did it before modernity. That Jews were doing this long before our modern society thinks we just invented something out of whole cloth. And also, I was really taken by Benjamin Franklin's saying, everything in moderation, including moderation, and really wanted to make my show on that. So, the Jewish version of this, I'm taking from the Rambam, who lived in the 12th century. However, he's really pulling from the Mishnah and the Talmud, which is recorded anywhere from 200 to 500 of the current era. And it's referencing discussions that can go all the way back to 200 or 300 before the Common Era. So it is pretty old stuff, much of it in line, or, contemporary with some of the Greek references that I mentioned before. So when Ben Franklin said this, moderation should be in moderation, so he was at least seemingly saying that as, well, it's okay to indulge in stuff, every so often. And we know he was, he did have a way with the ladies. He was known to take a sip of intoxicating fluid every now and then. But the Rambam has a whole different take on this. In fact, probably just the opposite. Instead of saying, yeah, it's okay to indulge, he's saying, when he's saying certain things should not be in moderation, it means they should be avoided entirely. So let's give you some examples. So what normally happens when he's saying everything in moderation, really the Rambam is giving us an instruction on what to do if you are too much of one thing. So he says everything should kind of be midas habeinanis, the middle way is what he calls it. And this is best in just about all character traits. And he says, if you are normally overly excited and passionate, so what should you do? You should really try and act very stoic and really go to the other extreme in order that you'll eventually balance out, because the balance is really the main thing. Okay? And normal, if you're, what's something else? If you like something too much, if you do one thing too much, then you should try and go to the other extreme for a while in order that you balance yourself out. Now, here's where the even, moderation comes in moderation. Sometimes moderation is not the answer. Sometimes he says you should actually avoid something entirely. And a couple of examples that he gives especially are haughtiness. That's one of the main ones. And anger. That's the other one. Now, haughtiness, he says that, you should strive to be very humble. It says about Moses, it says in the Torah that he was very humble. That's in Bamidbar, Numbers 12:3. It says that Moses was very humble. It doesn't just say that he was humble. It says he was very humble. And so based on that, the sages say that we should try very, very much to become shval ruach, to become lowly of spirit, to become very humble, basically. And anyone who has a haughty heart, they're kofar ba'ikr. They're basically going against the entire religion of Judaism. And this actually reminds me of a story of the Rebbe Rashab, who is the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe. And does that make sense? Yeah, the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he says that there's a Talmudic dictum that you should have an eighth of pride. Now, pride is something along these lines, right? This haughty spirit, you're prideful. And it's a very strange statement. You should have an eighth of an eighth. And so he was saying that basically you shouldn't have any pride. And someone mentions, what about this eighth of an eighth that it mentions in the Talmud? So he says, that's a very strange statement, isn't it? Why doesn't it just say 1/64th or a very little bit? An eighth of an eighth seems to be quite a strange way to word this. And he says what it really means is you look at the 8th verse of the 8th Torah portion in the Bible, and that's the kind of pride you should be having. So what is that? What is the 8th Torah portion? That's Parshas Vayishlach, which begins in Genesis chapter 32, verse 4. And the 8th verse would then be verse 11, chapter 32, verse 11 of Genesis, where it says, Katointi mikol hachasodim. Jacob is saying, I have become small from all of the kindness. He's telling God, from all the kindnesses that you've shown me, I've become small. And this is the kind of pride that we should have. An eighth of an eighth. Your pride should be katointi. I am small. And that's how the Rebbe Rashab answered this question. The other midah, the other character trait that I mentioned was anger, where it says that anger is like idolatry. So therefore you should avoid it at all costs. Right? You might think, hey, everyone gets angry. It's okay to be angry. Why does Judaism compare it to idolatry? Well, think about it. Why do you get angry? You get angry because something happens that you didn't want to happen. Or someone does something or says something that you don't like, that you didn't want. It basically says, God's not in charge of the world. God doesn't control everything. I'm in control of what happens to me. Or of what I see or what I hear. If something happens that I don't like, it shouldn't have happened that way. I should have, something, who knows what, should make it that doesn't work, that it didn't happen. And I'm angry about that. It didn't go the way I wanted to. It makes you more important. You think you know more than God. Now, this is especially important. These are some things between that Rosh are not in moderation. This is where you say everything in moderation, including moderation. Moderation has to sometimes kind of take a backseat because there are certain things,
10 days of repentance,
according to Judaism, that should be
it's an auspicious
expunged time to get right with God. Many think it's just about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But the truth is that really starting over a month ago, the beginning of the Hebrew month of Elul, which we just ended, that's when we start to take a spiritual accounting of our year, see where we can improve, see where we did well. And then there's the 10 days of Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, where we're trying to put that into practice in a very intense way. Then we get, after that, to Sukkot, which is in a week, where we're drawing down those spiritual blessings through joy and celebration. Well, that's a different story. We'll get there. So now it's a good time to show some moderation with what you typically indulge in. And push yourself a little by doing something extra, whether it's giving extra charity, upping your kosher or Shabbat observance. Just like we have to tune up our car every now and then, it's a time of year to tune up your connection to God. I'm sure you can find plenty of places to start, don't worry, and I know I can. So just pick one. Keep it manageable so you know you'll be able to succeed. And then reap those benefits in the coming year. I want to wish you a Gemar Chasima Tova. You should have a happy and sweet new year. You should be completely sealed for a good year. And you should have only open and revealed good from God above. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to keep in touch, so please feel free to continue the conversation with me on the Facebook page. Jews Did It First. You can email me, rabbi@jewishoswego.org. I'm also on Twitter at Oswego Rabbi, Instagram, Oz Rabbi. I'm everywhere. And Gemar Chasima Tova.